Black Elder ignored at funeral, the truth about him stunned everyone. Ezekiel Zeke Jackson, an 83-year-old man with a lifetime of quiet endurance etched into his face, stepped out of his weathered pickup truck. The cemetery stretched before him, its rows of headstones gleaming under the midday sun. The gravel crunched beneath his cane as he made his way toward the gathering crowd. His weathered hat sat snugly in one hand, while the other gripped the cane that had supported him through decades of hard labor. Zeke paused a few feet away from the mourners. He wasn't invited, he knew that much. But something deep inside him had urged him to come, to bear witness to this moment. Ahead of him, a small sea of black-clad figures gathered around an open grave. Their hushed voices floated through the warm air, blending with the rustling of the oaks and the faint melody of birdsong. The name on the temporary marker at the grave read, William Bill Hargrove. To the people gathered, Bill was a man to be celebrated, a local hero whose legacy was built on charity, leadership, and a reputation for fairness. To Zeke, he was something else entirely. As Zeke drew closer, the atmosphere shifted. Heads turned, curious eyes glanced his way before darting back to safer, more familiar faces. He could hear the whispers begin almost immediately. "Is that Zeke Jackson?" one woman murmured, leaning toward her companion. "Yeah," the man replied in a hushed tone. "Used to work for Bill back in the day? What's he doing here?" Zeke caught every word, though his weathered face betrayed no emotion. He had heard it all before, the subtle questions, the quiet dismissal, the unspoken belief that he didn't belong. Still, he pressed on, stepping closer to the edge of the gathering until he stood just outside the circle. He didn't join the mourners, choosing instead to linger on the fringes, his presence a quiet but undeniable challenge to their carefully constructed narrative. The casket gleamed in the sunlight, perched above the open grave on a simple wooden stand. Zeke's gaze locked onto it, his mind drifting to memories he had tried to leave behind. He had spent years working for Bill Hargrove, breaking his back in the fields while Bill built his fortune. Bill had always been charming in public, quick to flash a smile and preach about equality. But Zeke had known the man behind the mask. The man who wielded power like a weapon, always reminding Zeke of his place. The whispers grew louder, though no one dared address Zeke directly. "What's he doing here?" another voice said. "Doesn't seem like his kind of gathering." Zeke tightened his grip on his hat, his knuckles whitening. He wasn't here to disrupt or cause a scene. He was here because the weight of an untold story pressed heavily on his chest, a story that felt impossible to carry any longer. The pastor cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "We gather here today to honor William Hargrove," he began, his tone measured and solemn. "A man of integrity, a man who believed in fairness, kindness, and the power of community." Zeke's jaw clenched. Kindness? Fairness? Each word from the pastor felt like a stone thrown into the calm facade of the ceremony. To the mourners, Bill Hargrove was a beacon of light, a man who had done no wrong. But Zeke knew better. As the pastor continued, Zeke's mind wandered to the days he had spent under Bill's thumb. He could almost feel the sun beating down on his back as he worked the fields, the sting of Bill's sharp words when he dared to ask for better pay or humane treatment. "You should be grateful for what you've got," Bill had said once, his tone dripping with condescension. "I'm giving you an opportunity." The memories flooded back, each one sharper than the last. Zeke had carried the weight of those years in silence, his pride keeping him from speaking out. But now, standing on the edge of the crowd, watching people praise the man who had caused him so much pain, he felt something shift inside him. The pastor's voice softened as he invited the mourners to share their memories of Bill. One by one, people stepped forward, their voices trembling with emotion as they spoke of Bill's supposed kindness and generosity. A woman with tear-streaked cheeks recounted how Bill had once donated money to rebuild the town's library. "He believed in equality," she said, her voice cracking. "He wanted everyone to have the same opportunities, no matter where they came from." Zeke's chest tightened. Equality? He could almost hear Bill's voice in his mind, the way he had sneered when Zeke once entered the library to escape the rain. "There are places for you and places for me, Zeke," Bill had said, ushering him out with a false smile. The crowd murmured in agreement with the woman's speech, their collective nods an affirmation of the myth they had built around Bill Hargrove. Zeke shifted on his feet, the weight of the truth pressing harder against him. He wasn't sure how much longer he could stay silent. Another man stepped forward, his voice steady as he described Bill as a man of vision, who had always treated others with dignity. Zeke felt his jaw tighten further, the truth bubbling up inside him like a pot about to boil over. The whispers returned, faint but piercing. "Do you think he's going to say something?" one voice asked. "He wouldn't dare," another replied. "But Zeke would dare." The question was whether the people standing around that grave were ready to hear what he had to say, or if they would ever be ready to face the truth about the man they had come to honor. Zeke paused for a moment, scanning the faces of the crowd. The silence was deafening, save for the gentle rustle of leaves in the warm breeze. Some mourners shifted uncomfortably, their hands gripping the edges of their coats or nervously fiddling with their hats. Others stood perfectly still, their eyes wide, their expressions unreadable. "I worked those fields for nearly 2 decades, Zeke said, his voice rising just enough to carry over the stillness. "Day in, day out, from the crack of dawn until the sun dipped below the trees. I worked harder than I thought a man could, breaking my back, giving everything I had. And what did I get in return? Words, empty promises. And when I dared to ask for more, when I asked for fairness, Bill told me I should be grateful." Zeke's voice cracked slightly, but he pushed forward, unwilling to stop. "Grateful? Grateful for being paid less than the white workers? Grateful for being told to eat my lunch outside in the sun while others sat in the shade? Grateful for being reminded every single day that I was less in his eyes?" A soft gasp rippled through the crowd, and Zeke saw a few people glance nervously at each other. He turned his gaze back to the casket, standing like a monument to the man who had been both revered and feared in this town. "And it wasn't just me," Zeke continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "There were others, men and women who worked that farm, who tried to make an honest living, only to be crushed under the weight of Bill Hargrove's power. But they're not here to tell their stories. Some of them left, tired of fighting. Others stayed quiet because they had no choice." Zeke paused, gripping his cane tightly. He felt the weight of the years pressing down on him, the memories crowding his mind. He remembered the faces of those who had stood beside him in the fields, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. He remembered the hushed whispers at night, men and women too afraid to speak their truths openly. He took a deep breath, his voice softening as he said, I stayed because I believed things could get better. I stayed because I believed in God, and I believed that somehow, in some way, justice would come." The crowd was transfixed now, their discomfort mingling with something else. Curiosity, perhaps even guilt. Zeke's words were cutting through the veneer of respectability that surrounded the grave, laying bare the truths that had been buried alongside the town's unspoken history. "And when I finally found the courage to take a step forward," Zeke continued, his voice steady but heavy with emotion, "when I finally bought a small piece of land, my land, Bill took it from me. Said he needed it for expansion. I lost everything I had worked for, everything I had dreamed of giving to my family." The pain in Zeke's voice was palpable now, and a few members of the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A woman near the front dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while others stared at the ground, unable to meet his gaze. Zeke's voice softened, but it did not falter. That day, I wanted to hate him. I wanted to hate this town, but I didn't, because my faith wouldn't let me, because the God I believe in teaches forgiveness, even when it's the hardest thing to do. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. And that's why I'm here today, not to tear down a man who's already gone, but to tell the truth, to tell you that the man you all knew wasn't the man I knew, and to tell you that the only way we can move forward is by facing the truth, even when it hurts. Zeke took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. The silence was deafening, heavier now than it had been before. He could see the weight of his words sinking into the crowd, their faces a mixture of shock, discomfort, and quiet reflection. One by one, people began to look at Zeke, really look at him. Not as a nameless figure standing on the edge of their circle, but as a man who had carried the burden of their town's history on his shoulders. A young man in the back spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know," he said, his words trembling in the still air. I didn't know." Zeke nodded, his expression softening. "Most of you didn't. And that's why I'm here." Another man stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. "You have every right to be angry," he said, "but I want to listen. I want to understand." Zeke felt his heart lighten slightly. He wasn't sure if they were ready to truly hear what he had to say, but this was a start, a small crack in the wall that had divided them for so long. The pastor, who had been silent throughout Zeke's speech, stepped forward. His voice was steady but heavy with emotion. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "thank you. Thank you for your courage and for speaking a truth that needed to be spoken. I hope this can be a moment for all of us to reflect and grow." Zeke nodded, his eyes fixed on the casket. The man who had caused him so much pain was gone now, but the legacy of those years still lingered. He wasn't sure if the town would ever fully reckon with it, but at least now they couldn't ignore it. As the service ended and the crowd began to disperse, people stopped to speak with Zeke. Some offered apologies, others asked questions, and a few simply said, "Thank you." For the first time in decades, Zeke felt seen, not as a worker, not as an outsider, but as a man whose story mattered. As he turned to leave, his cane tapping softly against the gravel, Zeke felt a quiet strength within him. He had spoken his truth, and though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew he had taken the first step toward healing. Not just for himself, but for the town that had carried this unspoken burden for far too long. As the last murmurs of conversation faded and the crowd began to disperse, Zeke found himself standing alone by the grave. The casket, now suspended over the open earth, seemed almost to stare back at him. He felt a heaviness in his chest, not just from the memories that had resurfaced, but from the questions still lingering in the air. The people had heard his words, but had they truly listened? Would they remember what he'd said once the day was done? Or would it be swept away like the falling leaves that danced in the autumn breeze? A soft voice broke through his thoughts. "Mr. Jackson?" Zeke turned to see a younger woman, perhaps in her early 40s, standing a few feet away. Her dark brown eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she held a small Bible in her hands. "My name's Angela," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I just wanted to say thank you. My grandfather worked on that farm too. He never talked much about it, but when he did, he sounded tired, worn down, like it had taken something from him that he never got back." Zeke nodded, his gaze softening as he met her eyes. A lot of us felt that way, he said quietly. It wasn't just the work, it was what it did to your spirit, made you feel invisible. Angela nodded, clutching the Bible tighter. I wish I'd understood sooner, she said. But your words, they made me see, they made me feel it. Thank you for sharing your truth. Zeke reached out, resting a weathered hand on her shoulder. It's never too late to understand, he said, and it's never too late to change. As Angela walked away, Zeke noticed others lingering nearby, hesitant but watching him with a mix of curiosity and something softer, something like respect. A man in his 60s, his face weathered by time and labor, stepped forward next. His name was Earl, and Zeke recognized him immediately. Earl, Zeke said, nodding. Zeke, Earl replied, his voice rough but steady. He hesitated, looking down at the ground before meeting Zeke's gaze. I worked for Bill too back in the 70s. I didn't have it as bad as you, but I saw things. I didn't say nothing. I didn't stand up, and I should have. Zeke regarded him for a long moment before finally speaking. You were trying to survive, he said. We all were. But we're still here, Earl, and it's not too late to stand up now. The two men shook hands, their grip firm, their shared understanding unspoken but deeply felt. As the afternoon stretched on, more people came to Zeke, each with their own confessions, questions, or words of gratitude. A white woman, perhaps in her 70s, approached cautiously. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small handkerchief. My husband worked with Bill for years, she said, her voice barely audible. He thought the world of him, but I never understood why the workers seemed so distant, so defeated. I thought they were just shy. She looked at Zeke, her eyes pleading. I didn't know, Mr. Jackson. I didn't know. I should have known. Zeke sighed, his shoulders heavy, but his voice calm. A lot of people didn't know, he said. But the question now is, what are you going to do with what you know today? The woman nodded, dabbing at her eyes. I'll do better, she said softly. By the time the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cemetery, Zeke felt an unexpected sense of peace. He had come here uncertain, carrying the weight of years of silence. But now, as he looked out at the small groups of people still gathered, their faces reflective, he realized something had shifted. Later that evening, Zeke found himself invited to a community meeting at the church. The pastor, who had remained silent during much of the funeral, had approached him with a sense of urgency. Mr. Jackson, the pastor said, his tone earnest, what you shared today, it needs to be heard by more people. I'd like you to come speak at our next forum. We've been trying to have honest conversations about race in this town, but, well, we've been missing voices like yours. Zeke hesitated, the thought of standing in front of another crowd daunting. But then he thought of Angela, of Earl, of the countless others who had finally begun to listen. He thought of his faith, the scripture that had carried him through so many dark days. Psalm 34:18 came to his mind. The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Zeke nodded slowly. I'll be there, he said. The forum was unlike anything the town had seen before. The church was packed, black and white families sitting side by side. Zeke stood at the front, his cane steadying him as he began to speak. He told his story again, but this time he expanded on it. He spoke of the systemic injustices he had witnessed, the quiet endurance of so many who had been overlooked, and the faith that had kept him going even when hope seemed out of reach. The crowd listened intently, their faces a mixture of sorrow, guilt, and determination. By the time Zeke finished, the room erupted into applause, not the polite kind, but the heartfelt kind that comes from a place of deep respect. As Zeke stepped down, the pastor addressed the congregation. "Today, we've taken the first step toward healing," he said. "Let's not let it stop here. Let's continue to listen, to learn, and to act. Together, we can build a community that truly reflects the love and justice of God." Zeke sat quietly in the front pew, listening to the pastor's words. He felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. The weight of his silence had lifted, replaced by a quiet but powerful resolve. As the meeting ended, people approached Zeke again, thanking him, asking how they could help, promising to do better. For the first time, he felt that his story had meaning not just for himself, but for the town as a whole. When Zeke left the church that night, the moonlight illuminating the streets, he felt lighter. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that something had begun. And for that, he was grateful. The next morning, the sun rose over the town, bathing the streets and fields in a warm, golden light. Zeke sat on his porch, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. His thoughts wandered back to the cemetery, to the faces of those who had approached him, their expressions a mix of regret and longing for change. It was a feeling Zeke hadn't experienced in decades. Hope. He stared out at the horizon, the memories of the previous days swirling in his mind. Angela's words echoed in his ears, along with Earl's shaky admission and the pastor's invitation. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing years of unspoken pain, but also something else. The possibility of reconciliation, of understanding, of a future where truth wasn't ignored, but embraced. Later that morning, a knock at the door pulled Zeke from his thoughts. When he opened it, he found Angela standing on the porch, her Bible still clutched tightly in her hands. "Good morning, Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I hope I'm not bothering you." Zeke shook his head. "Not at all. Come on in." As she stepped inside, Angela glanced around at the modest but well-kept home. She sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the edges of the worn Bible in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday," she began, her eyes meeting his. "I've been thinking about my grandfather and about how little I understood what he went through, and I don't want that to continue. I want to do something. I want to help." Zeke nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "Help starts with listening," he said. "But it doesn't end there. It means speaking up when you see something wrong. It means standing beside the people who've been pushed down for too long." Angela leaned forward, her expression earnest. "I want to learn, and I want others to learn too. I was thinking, maybe we could organize something. A gathering like the forum at the church, but smaller, more personal." Zeke's brow furrowed, the idea taking root in his mind. "A space where people can share their stories," he said slowly, "and where others can learn from them." "Yes," Angela said, her eyes lighting up. "We could invite people from all over town, black, white, young, old. Create a space where no one feels ignored." Zeke's lips curved into a small smile. "I like that," he said. "But if we're going to do this, it needs to be done right. It needs to be honest, even if it's uncomfortable." Angela nodded. "Agreed. Let's start planning." Over the next few weeks, word spread about the gathering. Flyers appeared in storefronts, and invitations were handed out at church services and community events. The idea of bringing people together to share their stories intrigued some and unsettled others. Zeke heard whispers of skepticism as he walked through town, people questioning whether it would accomplish anything. "Why dredge up the past?" one man muttered in the diner. "Because it's not just the past," Zeke said, his voice firm. "It's the foundation of what we're living in today, and if we don't face it, nothing will change." The night of the gathering, the community center was packed. Rows of chairs were filled with people from every corner of the town. Black farmers who had spent their lives in the fields, white business owners whose families had lived in the town for generations, young people eager to understand the stories they'd only heard whispers of. Zeke sat at the front, his cane resting beside him, his heart pounding in his chest. Angela stood beside him, her hands folded as she welcomed the crowd. "Thank you all for being here," she said, her voice steady but warm. "Tonight isn't about blame, it's about understanding. It's about hearing each other, really hearing each other, and finding a way forward together." The room fell silent as Zeke stood, his cane tapping softly against the floor. He looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some hesitant, but all waiting. "I've carried my story for a long time," he began, his deep voice resonating through the room. "Too long. And I know I'm not the only one. There are people in this room who've lived through the same things I have, people whose stories deserve to be heard." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This isn't just about the past. It's about what we do with it. It's about recognizing the pain, the injustice, and choosing to make things better. Not for us, but for the generations coming after us." Zeke's words were met with silence, the kind of silence that meant people were listening, truly listening. He sat down, his heart pounding, as Angela invited others to share their stories. One by one, people stood and spoke. Earl shared his regrets about staying silent for so long. A young black woman talked about the challenges her family still faced in the town. A white teacher admitted her ignorance and vowed to do better for her students. The stories were raw, emotional, and often uncomfortable, but they were real, and for the first time, the people of the town were listening to each other in a way they never had before. As the night went on, Zeke felt a warmth growing in his chest. It wasn't just the stories, it was the connections being formed, the walls slowly being torn down. He saw people exchanging phone numbers, making plans to meet again, promising to continue the conversations. By the end of the evening, Angela stood once more, her voice filled with emotion. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Let's not stop here. Let's keep talking, keep learning, keep growing. Together, we can create a community that truly reflects the love and justice we believe in." The room erupted into applause, and Zeke felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. For the first time in decades, he felt not just hope, but faith in the people around him. As he left the community center that night, the cool air brushing against his face, Zeke looked up at the stars. He whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, the words of Psalm 34:18 filling his heart. "The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Zeke knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew it was worth walking. Together, they were beginning to build something new, something honest, something just, something that could endure. The weeks following the gathering at the community center were transformative for the town. Conversations that had once been silenced by fear or ignorance now echoed in homes, churches, and even the small-town diner. For Zeke, each passing day felt like a testament to the power of truth. Not just his truth, but the truths of everyone who had found the courage to speak and listen. Zeke sat on his porch one warm afternoon, sipping sweet tea and watching the world around him. The laughter of children echoed from down the street, a mix of voices, black and white, blending together in a melody he hadn't heard often in his lifetime. It filled him with a quiet joy, a reminder that the seeds of change had been planted and were beginning to grow. Angela arrived just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, her hands full of papers and a bright smile lighting up her face. "Mr. Jackson," she said as she sat beside him, spreading the papers on the small table. "You won't believe the feedback we've gotten since the gathering." Zeke chuckled softly, leaning forward to look at the papers. Letters from townspeople, young and old, spilled across the table. Some were simple thank you notes, while others shared deeply personal stories of how the gathering had inspired them. "Look at this one," Angela said, holding up a letter written in neat cursive. "Dear Mr. Jackson, your courage has changed the way I see my own family's history. I never asked questions, but now I'm learning the truth about how we treated others. I promise to do better and teach my children to do the same." Her voice cracked slightly as she read, her own emotions bubbling to the surface. Zeke's throat tightened. "It's not just me," he said. "It's all of us coming together. That's what's making the difference." Angela nodded. "And it's not just here," she added, pulling out a laptop. "People are sharing your story online. I found this video of the gathering. It's been shared hundreds of times. There are even comments from people in other states saying they want to start something similar in their own communities." Zeke leaned back, the weight of what she'd said settling over him. He had spent decades feeling invisible, his story unheard, his struggles unnoticed. Now, not only was his story being told, but it was inspiring others to confront their own histories, their own truths. "Do you think we're finally making a difference?" Zeke asked, his voice quiet but filled with hope. Angela placed a hand on his arm. "We already have," she said, "and it's just the beginning." That Sunday, the pastor invited Zeke to speak at the morning service. The church was packed, with people standing in the back and sitting on the steps outside just to hear him. Zeke stepped to the front, his cane steadying him as he looked out at the sea of faces. "I want to talk to you about truth," he began, his deep voice resonating through the sanctuary. "Truth isn't always easy, it's not always comfortable, but it's necessary. Without it, we can't grow. Without it, we can't heal." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "This isn't just about the past," he continued. "It's about what we do with the truth today. It's about the choices we make when we leave this church, the way we treat each other, the conversations we have with our children and grandchildren." Zeke pulled out a small, worn Bible from his pocket. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." I've felt brokenhearted. I've felt crushed. But I've also felt God's presence, guiding me to this moment, to this mission. And I believe He's guiding all of us now. The congregation was silent, hanging on his every word. "This town has a chance to be something greater," Zeke said. "Not because we ignore our mistakes, but because we face them with courage and faith, because we choose to build something better together." When the service ended, people lined up to speak with Zeke. Some offered tearful apologies, while others shared their own stories of resilience and faith. The pastor approached him with a smile. "Mr. Jackson, you've done something extraordinary here," he said, "and I believe it's just the beginning." In the following weeks, the community continued to rally around the idea of unity and healing. Small gatherings sprouted up, each one focused on sharing stories and finding ways to create a more inclusive town. The local library began hosting workshops on racial history, and schools incorporated lessons on the town's past into their curriculums. Angela suggested they start a monthly event at the community center, bringing in speakers and hosting open discussions. "We could call it the Bridge Series," she said, "to honor what you've started." Zeke smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I'd like that," he said. As the first event approached, Angela helped Zeke record a short video inviting people to attend. In the video, Zeke sat on his porch, the familiar warmth of his home visible in the background. "I'm Ezekiel Jackson," he began, looking directly into the camera. "You've heard my story, and now I want to hear yours. This isn't just about one person or one town. It's about all of us. Together we can learn from each other, grow together, and build a community we can be proud of. I hope you'll join us at the Bridge Series And if this message speaks to you, share it. Comment, tell us your story, and help us spread this mission of faith, truth, and unity. We're stronger together. The video was shared widely, drawing attention not just from the town, but from neighboring communities as well. On the night of the first event, the community center was filled to capacity, with people spilling out onto the lawn. Zeke sat at the front, watching as speaker after speaker took the stage, sharing stories of struggle, resilience, and hope. By the end of the evening, Zeke stood to address the crowd. "This isn't the end," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is the beginning of something powerful, something meaningful, and I thank God every day for giving me the strength to be a part of it." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing into the night. As Zeke stepped down from the stage, he felt a warmth in his chest, a certainty that the work they were doing would leave a lasting legacy. If Zeke's story inspires you, let's keep the conversation going. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we can create a community of understanding, faith, and unity. Subscribe to join us on this journey, because change starts with all of us.